if it is the case that Farage decides that tourism marketing, business events is a waste of money, then that is very serious news for the industry.
Hello and welcome to the meeting room. I'm James Lancaster.
And I'm Paul Harvey.
Today we're asking, what would a Reform UK government mean for the UK meetings and events sector? It's no longer a fringe question. The party has been leading in the polls for over a year now. And although the next election may be 2 or 3 years away, the projections are that Nigel Farage could well be our next Prime Minister. We're going to take a dispassionate, hopefully, look at Reform's policies and what they might mean for the sector. Paul, could you just start by putting Reform UK's surge into some kind of context for us, both domestically and internationally?
Reform are a radical, populist, right-wing party, I think that's fair to say. They're led by Nigel Farage, and to all extents and purposes, they are Nigel Farage. I think we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation about reform without Nigel Farage. Their policies, basically, they're into cutting taxes, curbing immigration. They're going to cut net zero. It's all the kind of populist right-wing policies that we've seen from people across the world, including, say, Donald Trump, Erdogan in Turkey, Orban in Hungary. It's right out of that playbook.
And it's fair to say Nigel Farage is a close ally of Donald Trump. He's always been photographed at Mar-a-Lago and in the States. They're quite pally, aren't they?
Absolutely. No, Nigel Farage makes a big play of that. I mean, he was famously, after Donald Trump was elected the first time, he was the first Brit to get in there and have his photo taken with him. There's a famous picture of them in front of the gold elevator, I believe. And he makes a big play of that. And fair play. I mean, like, if you were good mates with the most powerful man in the world, you might shout about it.
If he is following sort of Trump's playbook to a certain extent, what issues might there be for the UK meetings and events sector in terms of immigration, in terms of perception around whether we're a sort of closed border or an open border? How would that work, do you think?
The meetings industry is by definition global. And there are a few things that the meetings industry likes. It likes frictionless travel, welcoming rhetoric, it likes stability. Unwelcoming countries don't host global events. Unstable countries don't host global events. Countries where it's difficult to get into don't host global events. If you look at the US, the evidence is, based on what has happened, particularly in the second Trump administration, if you look at their rhetoric and their actions around immigration, it has had a chilling effect on events in that country. People are less inclined to go there. Delegates or planners, they're a bit more scared about going there. And Trump has proved immigration crackdowns hurt business events. And that's where this political and personal kind of relationship between Trump and Farage comes into play. Obviously, the UK and the US are very different places, but it's not completely in the realms of fantasy to say that a Reform UK government would be quite similar on immigration to the current US government, and that could have similar effects to our meetings industry. Farage-style politics could spook global events. That's the big concern that I guess the meetings industry might have.
A lot of it is down to perception, isn't it? In the first Trump term, there was this perception around immigration, but he didn't crack down as much as he has done in his second term. We've seen with ICE enforcement on the streets of Minneapolis. We've seen with visa crackdowns, this proposed social media vetting crackdown that the states have had. And it all adds up. Even if individual policy in itself isn't enough to put, isn't going to directly affect a delegate, it's just the overall perception, I guess, is the risk. The States has lost 40 million tourists in 2025. That's something like $12.5 billion US tourism dollars down the drain. They're so invested in immigration as their main policy that he might go for it and do something similar to ICE in terms of removing illegal immigrants, for example.
He's been banging this drum for a long time. We've got no reason to suspect that he isn't going to crack down on immigration. We don't know exactly how he's going to do it because we don't have a particular manifesto at the moment. The manifesto for the last general election, they've kind of positioned themselves away from that a little bit. So we don't know exactly what they're going to do. it would be very strange for Nigel Farage to get into power with all the rhetoric about immigration that he's had for the last 15, 20 years, even longer maybe, and then not crack down on immigration. That would be very unusual.
Another area of reform policy, like you say, these are kind of, they don't have a manifesto yet for the next election, but this is all in their old manifesto, around DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. What's going on there with reform? I don't get the impression they're going to be big cheerleaders of DEI.
No, so if you look at the council elections last year, where Reform did take control of a number of councils, they campaigned specifically to say that they were going to dismantle DEI initiatives at councils. And Nigel Farage said, if you're working in a DEI role, you've got to start looking for another career.
That sounds straight out of the Trump playbook. What about more specific policy? Is there anything around the Equalities Act, for example?
You'll have to check on this. I think they're repealing the Equalities Act.
I think I read that somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, what would that mean?
So this industry has made big play of DEI. I guess even some of the DEI practitioners in the industry have pulled back from using the phrase DEI, but they're still very much part of the core of what makes a good event.
Since the beginning of the second Trump administration, DEI has become a bit of a kind of loaded word or term. And yeah, you're right, people have pulled back from using it. But making events inclusive and accessible, I think not a lot of people could argue with those, could they?
No, I don't think they could, because they're not ideological, they're sort of practical, I would argue. Where you've seen Donald Trump with his executive orders against DEI, there's been a ripple effect, I think, throughout the business events industry in terms of corporate sponsorship, significant budget reductions for events, loss of diverse programming. So lots of conferences, especially government-funded ones, which had DEI in the program, were scrapped. So there are ripple effects. It's not just a kind of ideological talking point.
The UK has spent decades positioning itself as business-friendly, international, multicultural, and open in every sense of the word. And Reform are a threat to that, because their rhetoric is very different to that. And whether they're talking about DEI or sustainability, they're very against it.
So is there any upside to any of this?
They campaigned at the council elections last year on getting rid of DEI roles and cutting waste. They saw that as waste. They came in and then actually found that there were very, very few specific DEI roles in councils to cut. So the actual savings that they made were minuscule. Now, that's councils, obviously. If we're talking about them getting into power in government, I suspect there are more roles there and there would be more for them to cut. But I don't really know. We don't know how much there is, how much waste there is to cut.
They're a relatively new party, of course, so they're only a few years old right now. But what about their economic credentials?
Reform's policies are very pro small and medium-sized business, cutting taxes, cutting business taxes, corporation tax. Also, the income tax threshold. They raise the income, so you start paying income tax at a higher threshold. And all of that is very pro-business. I mean, it would... But short term, there is a danger that long term it would, like getting rid of all the sustainability stuff, could have a bad effect in the long term. But short term, certainly you would be paying a lot less and it would be better for business. There is that argument.
On the one hand, deregulation and lower headline taxes could be a positive thing, but you worry that there's kind of like instability, volatility, not knowing what's coming next could have long-term implications.
If we look back 4 years to Liz Truss famously came into power in October 2022, September 2022, and she had a budget, a mini budget, which she called a fiscal event, whatever you want to call it. That budget spooked the markets no end, Kwasi Kwarteng stood up in Parliament, he was then the Chancellor of the Exchequer, made everyone's mortgages go through the roof. And it was a budget for high earners, basically, and one that would help rich people get richer. Why do I mention this? Because Nigel Farage at the time called that the best Conservative budget since 1986. So that's not to say that if Reform were to get into power, he would do those things, but it shows the direction of travel, I think. And he praised Kwasi Kwarteng at the time, not only for doing the things that he was doing, but for ignoring the economic organisations that were warning him not to do those things. So the Institute for Fiscal Studies, for example, warned that that budget back in 2022 was going to have a bad effect. And it did. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, by the way, is warning that current reform policies risk leaving an economic black hole for the country of, they're talking like it's tens of billions of pounds, 70 or 80 billion pounds. But Nigel Farage is on record as saying that he thinks that ignoring those warnings is a good idea. So it's not unreasonable to worry that a reform government could lead to economic instability.
They wouldn't be the first government to do that, but I take your point. Now, reform-led councils have been in control in a number of areas since 2025. That's right, isn't it? Mm-hmm. What are the early signs?
I mean, I feel bad in a way because I don't just want to trash them, but turbulence is the word here.
Famously, a lot of very young councillors, 19, 20-year-olds in charge.
Warwickshire, I believe. So the council leader there, George Finch, is 19 years old. What you can say to that, and certainly what Nigel Farage has said, is that they want the best people for the job, and if the best person is 19 years old, then that's fair enough. Is it something to be worried about? I don't know. I think you see candidates for reform who end up in positions that they maybe never expected to end up in. For example, George Finch, who is the leader of the council, he wasn't originally the leader of the council. The original leader of the council, I think, retired through ill health, and he was kind of like promoted up to it. To be fair, we've seen that for a good number of years. There's so many times that MPs have kind of got into power and they haven't been vetted properly, and they've had to kind of stand down or kind of have an investigation or whatever. I'm thinking specifically of, if you look back at the 2017 general election, when the Labour Party won more seats than they were expecting to under Jeremy Corbyn, and got quite a few new MPs who perhaps hadn't been quite vetted as much as they could have been. But we're talking about, in 2017, we were talking about like 30 MPs in total, and maybe kind of 2 or 3 of them hadn't been vetted properly. If Reform get into power, they're currently on 5 MPs, around about. I don't know. It kind of fluctuates with people leaving and people joining. But they're on single figures, basically. If they were to get into power, you'd be talking about 300 MPs. And do they have the ability to vet all of those MPs?
It is a fair question. I would probably argue that this is going to face any fledgling party that makes an impact, as Reform have done very quickly.
Absolutely, but like, we haven't seen a party rise to power that quickly, have we?
No, I don't think we have.
It may well have happened a long time ago in the past.
In terms of government, we've had a 2-party system for 70 years. Along comes a party, makes a huge impact, looks in a good place to at least form a coalition government, maybe with somebody, or who would do that, I'm not sure. Gradualism for a lot of people hasn't worked, has it? They want a change and they want it quickly. But that's going to cause problems, because obviously Reform haven't got a huge pool of talent at the moment. And I guess they're trying to find it as quickly as possible.
Well, one of the ways that they're trying to find it as quickly as possible is by recruiting people from the old Conservative government. There are 5 Reform MPs who have defected from the Conservative Party, and so thinking about it, there's Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, Andrew Rosendale, Danny Kruger, and Lee Anderson, who defected, but then he did win his seat in the 2024 general election as a Reform candidate.
But not Liz Truss.
Not Liz Truss, although you have to imagine, given Nigel Farage's praise for her, that he wouldn't necessarily mind having her in the party, apart from the fact that Liz Truss is still absolutely too toxic for reform. I think you speak to anyone in the street, they would tell you that Liz Truss was a disaster and they'd have a bad reaction to her. So she's too toxic for the moment. I think Farage has put a deadline of May on Conservative defectors over the next
I think that's
few
quite
months.
a canny move on his part.
He's a very canny politician. He's been doing this a long time.
Probably the most
And he knows what he's doing.
influential politician of the last 20 years in the UK.
I'm struggling to think of anyone more influential.
We shall wait and see. It's like I say, it's probably three years away until the next election. Obviously, a lot can change in that time.
There was one final thing I actually wanted to bring
Yeah.
up, because there was recently a bit of a flare-up in the press around reform appearing at universities. Basically, reform wrote to Bangor University. They've been writing to a lot of universities asking if they wanted to put on a debate involving a reform MP. And some universities have put them on, and fair enough, because obviously universities are all about free speech and debate. Bangor University came out very strongly and said that they would not be hosting this event and that they did not agree with reform, and basically effectively banned them from appearing at the university. Reform then obviously got upset about this, which is fair enough. The interesting thing for me was that Zia Youssef, who is Reform's head of policy, said that Bangor University might just find itself being defunded.
Yeah, I saw that. Very sinister threat, that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And rather over the top as well, I thought.
Yeah.
For an issue, for a sort of a quarrel, really. And I think it plays into that whole idea of just because you ask for a platform doesn't mean that a platform has to be given every single time you ask for one. You know, there are all kinds of reasons why you might not be given a platform, but to sort of rather sort of sinisterly threaten to pull funding from a university, I thought was quite extraordinary.
Afterwards, we've seen reform candidates come out and say that it's not reform policy to defund universities.
Right, just to make that clear.
But when the reform head of policy is saying something, you have to assume that it's sort of being considered as policy. I don't think that's completely unfair to say.
I might not go as far as that. People say all kinds of silly things on Twitter and don't really think about it.
I mean, attacking universities is straight out of the populist radical playbook, because they see universities as part of kind of the woke global elite.
Yeah.
I was at an event recently, the Meet England Impact Network, the launch of that up in Sheffield, a programme that specifically uses academics and experts from across England to help win major global events. And it relies on our academics and our higher education system, which is one of the best in the world and the envy of the world in many ways. It relies on that being strong. And if we have a government that comes in and is attacking our higher education system and attacking academia, what does that mean for those academics who are trying to win major global events for England and the UK?
Convention Bureau all around the world have these ambassador networks which tap into universities. Precisely, you know, they get professors to bid for events effectively. That could potentially put the UK events sector at a disadvantage if reform were serious about defunding universities. I think the jury's still out on how serious that would be. I just think one point we haven't made, which is probably worth making, is that this is again was a Trumpian idea of cutting costs. There was Doge famously. The US tourism agency suffered in Trump's cutbacks, didn't it? I think is it Brand USA?
It had 80% of its funding cut.
Something
is
like
that
80%
right?
of its funding.
I think
cut.
it was good for people that can't really do percentages like me. I think it was like
it
was
a
100
number.
million and it went down to 20 million, something
Yes,
like that.
Something like that. It was extraordinary. You know, they saw it as kind of fluffy, peripheral. Visit London or Visit Britain might be in Farage's sights.
It would certainly be something that we'd want to know more about. If it is the case that Farage decides that tourism marketing, business events is a waste of money, then that is very serious news for the industry. But we just don't know that yet.
No,
But
we don't know, but I think we've sort of discussed the key policy pillars of reform, and it's fair to say There are question marks. They are a young party. They've still got 3 years to go until the next election. They can. So jury's still out all round. The other party that is really in the ascendancy at the moment is Zach Polanski's Green Party. They're in no immediate danger of becoming the next government, but there's 3 years to go. Stranger things have happened, so maybe we'll look at the Green Party next.
Yeah, we could well be talking about them soon on the podcast.
You did a great feature the other day on the Palace of Westminster.
The Palace of Westminster. I mean, I've been writing about this for a long time, ever since I joined MNIT back in 2013. It was an ongoing issue because the Palace of Westminster, the parliamentary estate, is crumbling. It's falling apart. It desperately needs refurbishing, rebuilding, renovating, call it what you want.
This is Big Ben to people tourists who are coming to flood into London every year. That iconic neo-Gothic Victorian building on the Thames.
You use the word iconic there, and I usually bristle whenever anyone uses the word iconic about anything because it's the most overused word in the English language. But the Houses of Parliament are genuinely iconic. But they do need refurbishing. I mean, like, large parts of the building are Victorian. A lot of it is older than that as well. If you think to Westminster Hall, which was where the Queen lay in state back in 2022, that dates from 1097. That's 11th century. And if you imagine your office, there's bits of your office that are nearly 1,000 years old.
But what's the repair bill?
The repair bill, it needs repairing. And they set up a committee called the Restoration and Renewal Client Board.
Catchy.
They've been working on this for a while, and they've whittled it down to 2 options for repairing the building, carrying out the renovations. The headline one, I suppose, would be the most expensive one, which is a potential bill of £40 billion. Yeah. And those renovations could take up to 61 years. The Houses of Parliament originally, they were supposed to take, when they were being built, they were supposed to take 6 years to build, and they ended up taking 30 years to be built.
6 years, is that all?
6 years.
Because when you look at it, I think that's optimistic.
And they had a budget of £700,000 in the first place.
Which is a new kitchen nowadays for some people.
Yeah. But it ended up costing £2 million. Now, if you extrapolate that all out, so it took five times as long as they thought it was going to take to build it. If it takes 5 times as long to renovate it as they're currently projecting, it's going to take 300 years at a cost of over £100 billion. That is one of 2 options. So that is the second option, which is the staged decant, which would involve works basically going on while people were still using the building. That's why it's more expensive and takes longer, because they're not just going into an empty building and stripping it out and repairing it. They're having to do it while people are still using it as an office. So there's some kind of like proposal where MPs from the Commons would move into the Lords for a couple of years while they did the Commons, that kind of thing. Yeah. So that's the stage decant. The full decant, that still will cost £15.6 billion and take up to 24 years.
And where would they move?
Under both plans, you would see the House of Lords moving into the QE2 Conference Centre.
Which is right opposite.
Right opposite, yeah. So the House of Commons would move into the northern part of the estate in some kind of temporary building, I think, or they'd go somewhere else. But the House of Lords would move into the QE2 Conference Centre, which is obviously a prime bit of conferencing estate in the middle of central London. And for that to be out of action for, 24 years? For 61 years?
It's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's not a small undertaking.
When you think about how central it is, because a lot of obviously the Excel is out over in the Docklands of East London. So for prime sort of central, easily accessible conference and event space, QE2 is perfect, isn't it?
It would have a knock-on effect. Rates go up elsewhere to compensate.
What would you do? Like you say, the place is falling apart. The electrics, apparently, I watched a documentary on it once, and the electrics are just like, it's like spaghetti junction down there, and I'm amazed there hasn't been a fire so far.
I mean, coming back to what you were saying, the electrics are terrible. There's asbestos. There's also the sewage there. The sewage system is Victorian. It's the Victorian pumping system.
There's a joke there.
There is, but we're going to rise above it. What would I do? Well, you've got the choice between moving out for 24 years or moving out for 61 years. It's going to cost billions of pounds, whatever happens. I'd ignore both those options. And I would build a new Parliament building somewhere else. And then the Houses of Parliament, the current Parliament building, can become a museum. Still do it up. And as I said at the beginning, it is iconic. I'm not suggesting we get rid of that whatsoever. We need to keep that. It's an incredible building. The history there is amazing. But it's not fit for purpose. These two options, they're bad and terrible as far as I can tell.
It would be an enormous psychological and emotional wrench to leave the House of Parliament there, wouldn't it? Do you suspect that is really what's keeping the whole show in that building? The fact that it's just almost psychologically impossible to think of the UK Parliament not being on the banks of the River Thames.
Absolutely. I mean, when asked about it last week, the Conservative MP Sir Edward Lee called one of the options absurd. I mean, they just literally cannot imagine.
They can't imagine moving to Birmingham.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It makes perfect sense for them to build a new building somewhere else, one that is fit for purpose, because it is worth mentioning that as iconic as it is, it doesn't work for the amount of MPs that we currently have. There are 650 MPs and they can't all get on the benches of the House of Commons. The other thing as well, we mentioned the two-party system earlier. Those benches that we have in the House of Commons are two sides of the room facing each other. It's adversarial. It was built around a two-party system. That's not what we have anymore. The next general election is looking like it's going to be 5 parties kind of like duking it out and seeing who comes out on top. It doesn't make any sense. That is not how our Parliament works. It makes much more sense to go Birmingham, to Manchester, to somewhere north, more central in the UK, because remember that MPs go back to the constituencies every week.
Including Scotland.
So the Midlands makes much more sense to have our Parliament.
And the QE2 centre would not need to be...
The QE2 centre would not be affected. We could just leave it open. And also, I mean, you could build it next to HS2, to a station in HS2, so that everyone can get there easily if you're worried about travel times up from London.
But that's another kind of symbol of what we do so well in this country, isn't it? We sort of earmark these huge projects and then always they overrun by billions and end up, never being fully completed. Is Westminster Palace just another kind of example of that sort of very British inability to do and complete large infrastructure projects?
It feels to me like they just do not want to make a decision on this. They are kicking the can down the road. Even with these two options that we have, they are not going to make a decision on this until 2030. They just need to get on with it.
Anything raised in Parliament about it on behalf of the business events sector?
They have done in the past. Certainly when there was this first move there were moves by the QE2 to try to kind of raise awareness of this as a potential issue. I think it's been going on so long. It's kind of we're waiting to see what happens. I think there's more to this story, and we'll get more coming out over the next months and years.
Because in 3 years' time, it could be a reform government anyway, so they may have some ideas on it. If they want to cut waste, they may think...
If they want to cut waste, they could just pull it down.
Paul, thanks very much for your time today on The Meeting Room.
Thank you very much, James.